Good morning, everyone, and welcome to The Great Everything, your source for philosophical musings and cultural discoveries here on Anchor. I'm Patrick, a former banking lawyer who saw the light and quit to dedicate my life to trying to learn everything in the universe, and will probably fall very short of that lofty ambition, but you die trying. So, over the weekend, I got a call from the listener Oscar in Shanghai who asked me to talk a bit about lying. Despite my distaste for ethics as a philosophical topic, lying is actually quite an interesting thing to think about, because it's one of those things that we universally accept is wrong, yet we all do it. So, what's going on there? The classic definition for lying is a statement made by one who does not believe it with the intention that someone else shall believe it. So, as you can imagine, there's a whole load of discussions on the meaning and the philosophical definition of lying. Does a lie have to be a statement? Can a single word be a lie? Can a metaphor be a lie? Can misleading be a lie? That's one I find interesting. You know, when you're not actually lying, you're saying the truth, but you're saying it as a double bluff. You want the other person to not believe the truth. So, we've all done it at some point. We might be saying something true, but with a facial expression as though we were being sarcastic. And that reminds me of one of my favorite Jewish jokes from when I was a kid. The merchant, Moshe, he meets his business rival, Yankele, in the train station. And he says, "Yankele, so where are you traveling today?" He's got a New York accent, even though he's in Belarus. And Yankele says, Moshe, I'm just traveling off to Minsk to buy some grain. And Moshe looks at him with a shrewd expression and says, "You see, Yankele, I know you're telling me that you're going to Minsk to buy grain because you want me to believe that you're actually going to Gomel to buy barley. But in fact, I have it on very good authority that you are truly going to Minsk to buy grain. So my question to you is, why lie?" Okay, so I tried. But the point is, that was a classic example of saying the truth but with the intent to mislead and misdirect. A red herring, so to speak. Anyway, back to lying. Leaving aside the metaphysics and the definition of it, the discussion on lying should really revolve around the ethical implications. Is it wrong to lie? And if so, in what cases? But here's the problem, and as you know, it's a problem I have with ethics in general, that whatever rule you come up with, there's always exceptions. If you take the deontological approach of philosophers like Kant, that lying is always bad, so you can never, ever, ever do it, well, what about if lying could save a life or your own life? Or what if lying could spare the embarrassment or the suffering of someone else? And the classic example I made in my ethics show was about the elderly grandmother whom you tell, "Oh, you're looking great." And it's not true, but she believes you. It makes her feel better. Is that also wrong? And on the other hand, if you take the utilitarian approach, that is, that lying is good or bad, depending on the outcome or the benefit, the utility, then should doctors refrain from telling terminally ill patients about their diagnosis? They're beyond saving, so why give them a miserable day? And also, more importantly, if it's all about outcomes, how do you calculate outcomes in complex situations? So that's the problem. There's no way you can come up with a universal rule that can deal with all the situations. You can't just neatly tie it together with a little ribbon on top and say, "Here you go, here's the complete rule book about lying, and it works in every case." So, right, there's no universal rules. That means it's a case-by-case thing. We have to decide what to do in each individual situation. But then who tells me that I have the appropriate ethical wisdom to make those right calls? It's the same problem with ethics in general, that without any universally applicable rules, how do we know how to act in every situation? How do we figure out when, if ever, it's okay to lie? And hopefully, that's what we'll find out next. So we're talking about the ethics of lying, and the reason it's hard to talk about is because, as with all ethical issues, you never have a universal rule that can apply to all cases equally. So how do we talk about this? Maybe a good starting point is something we can all agree on, and that is that we share a basic intuition that lying is bad, right? You're with me on that one. We all agree on that. Okay, but then the question is, why is it bad? And if we can work that out, then maybe we can extract some general principles. So, why is lying bad? I've looked around and I think that there's two broad camps. The first is that lying is just wrong, period. It's just a bad thing. And that's the position of religious people, but also philosophers like Kant. To which I say, well, that doesn't answer the question though, because we know that lying is bad, but we're trying to figure out why it's bad, what we're trying to avoid by not lying. So the second camp, the more interesting one I think, is that lying is bad because of what happens when we lie, the consequences of lying. Perfect, that's exactly what we want to be talking about. So, what happens when we lie? I think the main negative consequence of lying is the consequence to the basic infrastructure of society. Lying diminishes trust between humans, because the more people lie, the less trust there is, and interactions and commerce and love and pretty much everything else that depends on language is based on us being able to take people at their word. Without that trust, you couldn't know anything about the world that you didn't experience directly. Without that trust, you wouldn't know anything about the news, about science, because who's telling you that what you're reading isn't a lie? And lying also messes with language, which I've defined as the essential infrastructure of our reality. Imagine language as a highway system, but one where, in this case, you could assume that anything from, say, 20% to 100% of all the road signals were wrong. The whole thing would be useless. And lying is also bad for consistency, a principle I've talked of before here on Anchor, because lying interferes with the ability of the person being lied to make free and informed decisions about their life. All these points are rather utilitarian. They're about the consequences. They're about how we work better as a society if we can trust one another. Fine. So perhaps rule number one is it's not about lying per se, but it's about maximizing our ability to trust one another. So, could that mean that if we're looking for exceptions to the rule that we shouldn't lie, those exceptions should be cases in which our lie doesn't impact our ability to trust one another overall? We're asking the question of why lying is bad, and one answer we came back with is that lying, especially on a large scale, diminishes trust in each other. And society, our interactions, our language, our being able to rely on information we read in books or in the papers or watch on television, all rely on our ability to trust each other, not to lie. So that might lead me to think, okay, maybe it's not lying in itself that is bad. What's bad is the impact that lying has on trust. So, if we're looking for exceptions, maybe these exceptions need to be the types of lie that do not impact trust in one another. So perhaps a takeaway from this is that we can maybe find exceptions in cases where the lie will not impact people's trust in us overall. An example of this might be short-term lies that are to the exclusive benefit of the person being lied to. A lie like that wouldn't impact trust because it would be done with the exclusive intention of benefiting the person being lied to. So even if I find out that you've lied to me, in this case, I might not trust you're telling me all the facts, but I can trust that you're telling me something that is for my own good. So I might not trust your words, but I will trust you as a person, and that's important. A lie like that would have to be short term too, because prolonged lying is always going to impact trust in the long run. The longer you lie about something, the less trustworthy you're going to look. And also, a lie like this, to be a valid exception to our new rule, it has to exclusively benefit the other person. So say you're studying for your final exams and there's terrible news about a family loss, and I lie about it to you because I don't want to distract you from your studies. that isn't a benefit to you overall, because I'm stopping you from doing something that you want to do that is important to you, grieving, attending the funeral. So you can see that there's some disbenefit. It doesn't exclusively benefit you, this lie. But for instance, let's say you're going through a hard time and I just got some really good news, and you ask me about this news that I was expecting, and I lie about it because I'm waiting for you to get over your tough break, and then I'll tell you. I'll say, hey, actually, when you asked if I got that promotion, I said no, but actually, I just didn't think it was the right time to tell you. That does exclusively benefit you, especially if it's only short term. I'm just waiting for a better moment to tell you, but it's not like I'm depriving you of anything. There is no disbenefit. So that's the first takeaway. Maybe it's okay to lie when it doesn't impact trust overall. And an example of that might be a short-term lie that is to the exclusive benefit of the person being lied to. We're talking about the consequences of lying, and we've discussed the social impact of a lack of trust in each other and how that impacts society. And through this, we've reached a potential exception to the rule that we shouldn't lie, and that is lies where, when we're found out, overall trust will not be diminished. An example of that is a short-term lie that is exclusively to the benefit of the person being lied to. So, for instance, if you tell your grandmother who's very ill that she's looking fine, that is a lie that will not diminish trust overall, because although she might find out, she might hold her mirror up, she'll know that the reason you're saying it is for her to have a better life overall, to feel better. So she might not trust the individual words you've spoken, but her trust in you, in your relationship, will in no way be diminished. Whereas on the other hand, if, say, there's a tragedy affecting someone and you don't tell that person, or you lie about it in order to protect them, that person might actually feel that you've deprived them of an opportunity to act the way they would have had they known. They might have wanted to grieve. They might have wanted to go talk to the person involved. There's a million different things that they might have wanted to do, and you've robbed them of those opportunities. You have negatively impacted their freedom to make conscious, informed choices about their own life. So that lie didn't exclusively benefit them, no matter your intentions. You might almost say that it's a lack of respect. And respect brings me on to another point, because there's so many reasons lying is bad, but here's a main one. Lying is bad because it treats those who are lied to as a means to achieve the liar's purpose, rather than as a valuable end in themselves. This comes from Kant, it's one of his categorical imperatives. But the point is, in many cases, when you're lying to further some aim, to obtain something, you're using people, and that is the biggest no-no. One of the great achievements of Western culture is that a couple of hundred years ago, we started looking at each other as individuals with human rights. A person was no longer just a tool to be used by gods or popes or kings or bankers. In theory, at least, we were all human beings with a right to choose our own destinies, free from the interference of outside forces. So when you deceive somebody for your own aims, you're falling short of this very high and very important standard, this fundamental ideal of respect for a fellow human being as a human being, with agency, with the ability to determine their own courses of action and destinies. And so maybe from that, we can find another rule, that it's not about the lie, it's about the respect for the individuals around you. And so maybe another exception is that some lies are okay to the extent that they do not disrespect the individual humanity of the person being lied to. And I think that most of the examples that I've discussed on this series so far would fit within this exception, because they don't disrespect the person being lied to.